The engine of Marcus Steele's Dodge Charger purred quietly as he waited at the red light, his Navy SEAL training keeping him alert even in the mundane moments of civilian life. After 12 years of deployments, Afghanistan, Iraq, Syria, classified operations he still couldn't discuss, driving through suburban Virginia should have felt like the safest thing he'd ever done. He was wrong. How does a war hero become a wanted man in his own country? You're probably asking yourself right now. Let me tell you a story that will change how you think about military service, racism, and what it really means to fight for freedom. Marcus Steele wasn't just any Navy SEAL, he was one of the best. Silver Star, Bronze Star with Valor Device, Purple Heart. He'd survived firefights that would break most men, led missions that saved countless lives, and carried the weight of brothers lost in combat. But none of that training prepared him for what would happen at 11:47 p.m. on a Tuesday night in May 2023, when two police officers decided that a black man in a nice car in a nice neighborhood had to be a criminal. This isn't just another story about police violence. This is the story of how a decorated combat veteran discovered that his highest-stakes mission wasn't overseas. It was right here at home, fighting for the very rights he'd risked his life to protect. It's about how military training, designed for foreign enemies, became the only thing standing between him and death at the hands of those sworn to serve and protect. Because sometimes the most dangerous battlefield isn't in a war zone, it's in your own neighborhood at a traffic stop, when racism meets authority and a man trained to survive has to choose between self-defense and becoming another hashtag. Marcus Steele grew up in Bronzeville, Chicago, where protect and serve had always sounded like a cruel joke. His earliest memories included watching his older brother get thrown against a wall for looking suspicious, which meant existing while black and wearing a hoodie. His father, a postal worker who'd served in Vietnam, taught him the rules before he could ride a bike. Hands visible. No sudden movements, answer yes sir, no sir, and never, ever run. Racism is America's original sin, his father would say, adjusting his American Legion cap. I fought for this country, but this country still fights against people who look like us. Your job is to survive it. Survival meant becoming exceptional. If white kids got C's and still got into college, black kids needed straight A's. If white men got second chances, black men didn't get first ones. Marcus learned to outrun, outfight, outthink every obstacle, except the color of his skin. By 17, he'd found his escape route, the Navy. The recruiter made it sound like transformation. Put on that uniform, serve your country, and when you come back wearing medals, they'll have to respect you. They'll see you're one of the good ones. They'll see you as American first, black second. Marcus bought the dream wholesale. He bulked up from 150 pounds to 185, ran until his legs felt like they might fall off, studied every military manual he could find. When the SEAL teams invited him to try out, one of only 3 black candidates in his class, he knew he'd found his calling. Bud S. training nearly killed him. Hell Week was exactly what it sounded like. 5 days of wet, cold pain and exhaustion that broke men who'd been athletes their whole lives. Marcus learned to embrace the suck, to find peace in chaos, to lead when others wanted to quit. He became the guy other SEALs wanted on their team when everything went sideways. The deployments came fast after that. Afghanistan, 2012. His team rescued a captured journalist from Taliban custody, a mission that earned him his first Bronze Star. Iraq, 2014. He led the assault on an ISIS compound that freed 17 humanitarian workers. Syria, 2016. He took 3 bullets while dragging his wounded commanding officer to safety during an ambush, earning the Silver Star he'd never wanted to win. The officers who tried to kill him wanted to write a simple story. Dangerous black man neutralized during routine traffic stop. Instead, they authored a complex narrative about the wages of racism, the resilience of community, and the revolutionary power of refusing to accept less than full humanity in return for service. Rendered sometimes the most patriotic thing a veteran can do isn't fighting enemies overseas, it's fighting injustice at home, even when that injustice wears a uniform and carries a badge. Sometimes the highest form of service is refusing to let your country kill you for the crime of existing, while black. Even after you've proven your loyalty with blood and sacrifice, Marcus learned what generations of black veterans have always known. In America, military service provides no protection from racism. If anything, it makes you more dangerous in the eyes of those who fear black excellence, who see competence as threat, who cannot reconcile their stereotypes with your achievements. But he also learned something else. Survival is not enough. Transformation is not optional. Justice is not negotiable. And sometimes the warrior's greatest victory comes not from defeating enemies, but from refusing to become one despite every provocation. The Veterans for Justice initiative continues its work because the need continues. Black veterans still face discrimination, still encounter violence, still struggle to navigate the contradiction of serving a country that doesn't always serve them. But now they have resources, community, and the knowledge that sometimes survival means fighting back, not with weapons, but with truth, with law, with the kind of organized resistance that has always been the most powerful force for change in American history. Marcus Steele survived bullets meant to silence him. Instead, they gave him a voice that's still speaking, still organizing, still fighting for the America he thought he was protecting when he wore the uniform overseas. The America he still believes in, even when it tries to kill him. Because some things are stronger than racism. Some things are more powerful than fear. Some battles are worth fighting even when victory seems impossible, especially when your life depends on winning them. Through it all, he kept believing the recruiter's promise. Each medal, each commendation, each deployment ribbon was supposed to build armor against the racism waiting back home. He was protecting the very ideals that his father said would never protect him. Liberty, justice, equality under law. But combat has a way of clarifying things. Overseas, Marcus learned that survival depended on reading situations fast and accurately, understanding who was dangerous, who was desperate, who was pretending to be something they weren't. He became an expert at threat assessment, at seeing trouble before it saw him. He needed those skills more than he realized, because while he was fighting America's enemies abroad, America was still fighting against people who looked like him at home. The medals didn't change the way white women clutched their purses when he walked past. The uniform didn't prevent the traffic stops that happened with suspicious regularity whenever he drove through certain neighborhoods. The combat experience didn't matter to police officers who saw a black man an assumed threat before they saw the veteran who'd bled for his country. Marcus came home in 2022 with a medical discharge, the lingering effects of too many explosions, too many gunshot wounds, too many years pushing his body past its limits. He bought a house in Virginia Beach, joined the local Veterans of Foreign Wars post, and tried to build the life he'd fought to protect. He started a small security consulting business, worked with local veterans groups, and told himself that his hardest battles were behind him. He was wrong about that too. The SEAL teams had taught him to expect danger in hostile territory, to scan rooftops for snipers, to check vehicles for explosives. They hadn't taught him how to navigate the minefield of being a black man in America, how every routine interaction could turn deadly, how his training could be used against him, how the very skills that kept him alive in combat might be the thing that gets him killed at home. Marcus learned what his father had tried to teach him. In America, black veterans fight two wars, the one against foreign enemies and the one against domestic racism. Both can kill you. Only one gets recognized as combat. The trouble started with a broken taillight. Marcus noticed it when he got into his car, noticed that the right rear light was out, knew he should get it fixed, but also knew that equipment violations were often just pretexts for what cops called fishing expeditions. In neighborhoods like this one, a broken taillight could turn into a felony stop real fast if you fit the wrong profile. He'd been careful. Speed limit precisely posted, hands at 10 and 2, registration and insurance in the glove compartment, concealed carry permit, which he'd earned through the same training that qualified him for SEAL operations, properly displayed. He'd even chosen this route specifically, well-lit, moderate traffic, no history of aggressive policing in the area. Sometimes being careful was enough, sometimes it wasn't. The patrol car appeared in his rearview mirror at 11:43 p.m., exactly 3 blocks from his house. Marcus felt his combat instincts kick in, not panic but calculation. The same hyper-awareness that had saved his life in Fallujah now processed every detail. Speed, positioning, lighting, escape routes. But this wasn't a hostile village, and these weren't insurgents. This was supposed to be home. The lights came on at 11:44 p.m., red and blue strobing across his mirrors like warning signals from another life. Marcus activated his hazard lights, reduced speed, and began looking for a safe place to pull over. His training kicked in. Not SEAL training, but the other kind. The survival skills every black man learns. Hands visible. No sudden movements. Keep the interior light on. Document everything if possible. He spotted a well-lit gas station ahead and signaled his intention to turn in. Standard protocol when you're carrying a weapon legally. You want witnesses, you want cameras, you want neutral ground. The patrol car followed, close but not aggressive. So far, so routine. Marcus pulled into a parking spot directly beneath the overhead lights, killed the engine, and placed both hands on the steering wheel at 12 o'clock. He could see the officer approaching in his side mirror. White, mid-30s, crew cut, the kind of build that suggested either military service or aspiration to it. The officer's hand rested on his weapon, stance casual but ready. "License and registration," the officer said through the window. "Not quite a command, not quite a request. Good evening." "Officer," Marcus replied, keeping his voice level and respectful. "My license is in my wallet, which is in my right back pocket. My registration and insurance are in the glove compartment. I'm going to reach for my wallet first, okay?" The officer nodded, but something shifted in his posture, a tension that hadn't been there seconds before. Marcus moved slowly, deliberately, extracting his wallet and handing over his driver's license and concealed carry permit together. His military ID was visible through the clear plastic window. The officer took the documents, studied them, and Marcus watched the change happen in real time. Saw the moment when military veteran processed into black man with a gun, when gratitude for service transformed into perceived threat, when the story the officer had been writing in his head, routine traffic stop, maybe a ticket, definitely a power trip, got rewritten into something else entirely. "You carrying right now?" The officer asked, his hand now clearly resting on his weapon. "Yes, sir." "Glock 19, 4 o'clock position, as permitted by my concealed carry license. Would you like me to—" "Keep your hands where I can see them. Don't move," Marcus froze. This was the moment. That split second when every black man in America has to make impossible calculations. Comply and risk being shot for following suspicious commands, or question and risk being shot for resisting authority. His SEAL training screamed for tactical assessment, but survival training demanded absolute compliance. "Officer, I'm happy to step out of the vehicle if that's what you need. Just tell me how you want me to do it safely." "Shut up. You don't get to tell me how to do this." The second patrol car arrived at 11:47 p.m. Marcus could see it pulling in behind the first, could see the silhouette of another officer approaching. His combat instincts were screaming now. The situation was escalating, and escalation meant danger. Two officers meant twice the likelihood of miscommunication, twice the potential for fear-based reactions, twice the chance that someone would decide that a trained black man was too dangerous to leave alive. The second officer, older, heavier, with the kind of mustache that belonged in a 1970s cop show, approached on the passenger side. Flashlight beam sweeping across Marcus's face. "What's the problem here?" Marcus asked, keeping his voice steady despite the adrenaline flooding his system. "The problem," the first officer said, "is that you've got a lot of explaining to do. Concealed carry permit doesn't give you the right to intimidate law enforcement." Intimidate. The word hung in the air like a loaded weapon. Marcus had been called many things in his life. Hero, warrior, survivor, but never intimidating. Not by people who knew what the word meant. Not by people who understood that the most dangerous men never had to prove it. "I'm not trying to intimidate anyone, officer. I'm trying to comply with your instructions and get home safely." That's all, but that wasn't all, and they both knew it. Because compliance wasn't enough when the crime was existing while exceptional, when the real offense was being more competent, more disciplined, more dangerous than the people paid to protect you. When survival depended on making yourself smaller than you were, safer than you needed to be. more grateful than anyone should have to be for the privilege of not being killed during a traffic stop. "Step out of the vehicle," the first officer commanded. "Slowly, hands where I can see them at all times." Marcus moved with the precision of someone who'd practiced high-stakes extractions under fire. Left hand on the door handle, right hand on the steering wheel. "Open door slowly. Pivot buddy. Feet on ground. Stand smoothly. Hands visible at all times. Every movement calculated to minimize threat perception. Maximize survival probability. Turn around. Face the car." As Marcus turned, he saw something that made his blood run cold. The second officer had drawn his weapon. Not pointed it, not yet, but drawn it. The barrel was visible above the roof of the car, steady and ready. It was 11:49 p.m., and Marcus Steele, decorated combat veteran, Silver Star recipient, man who'd survived 3 wars, was staring at the very real possibility of dying in a gas station parking lot because of a broken taillight and the color of his skin. On the ground, face down. "Do it now." Marcus dropped to his knees, then to his stomach, the rough asphalt grinding into his cheek. He could feel the weight of both officers approaching, could hear the scratch of radios, could sense the tension that preceded violence. His training told him to stay calm, to breathe, to wait for opportunity. His experience told him that opportunity might never come. Hands behind your back. Cross your wrists. As the first officer moved to secure the handcuffs, Marcus felt something else. The barrel of a weapon pressed against the back of his head. Not the officer's service weapon. Something larger, heavier. The second officer's shotgun, probably. The kind of overkill that suggested either extreme fear or extreme malice. "Move and I'll blow your head off." The words were whispered, almost conversational, but they carried the weight of absolute certainty. Marcus had been in this position before. Helpless, outnumbered, staring down the barrel of someone who wanted him dead. But this wasn't a foreign battlefield, and these weren't enemy combatants. These were American police officers, and he was an American citizen. And none of that mattered because he was black first and everything else second. "Please," Marcus said quietly, hating the word even as he spoke it. "I'm not resisting. I'm not armed. I'm not a threat. I'm just trying to get home." "You're exactly what I think you are," the officer replied. "And you're going to stay exactly where you are until we decide what to do with you." What happened next would define the rest of Marcus Steele's life. Because sometimes the most important battles aren't the ones you choose. They're the ones chosen for you, fought on ground you didn't pick, against enemies wearing uniforms instead of enemy colors. Sometimes survival means fighting back, and sometimes fighting back means becoming the very thing your oppressors claim you are. The shotgun barrel pressed harder against his skull. The handcuffs clicked shut around his wrists, and Marcus Steele, Navy SEAL, decorated veteran, American hero, prepared to make the hardest decision of his life, submit and possibly die, or resist and definitely become a criminal in the eyes of the country he'd sworn to protect. The first shot came at 11:52 p.m. Marcus heard it before he felt it, a sharp crack that split the night air, followed immediately by the whine of a bullet passing inches from his head. The asphalt exploded near his face, sending fragments into his cheek. His combat instincts took over completely, rolling him sideways despite the handcuffs, seeking cover behind the patrol car's tire as another shot rang out. "Stop shooting. Stop shooting. He's unarmed. He's handcuffed." The voice belonged to the first officer, but it was too late. The second officer had already fired twice more, each round missing Marcus by fractions of inches as he moved with the muscle memory of someone who'd survived ambushes in 3 different countries. "Get on the ground. Don't move. I'll kill you." The second officer's voice was high with panic, his weapon tracking Marcus's movement, even as the first officer tried to regain control of the situation. Marcus pressed himself flat against the ground, his hands still cuffed behind his back, his face scraped raw from the asphalt. His mind was racing through scenarios, calculating angles, assessing threats. SEAL training had prepared him for capture, for torture, for situations where death seemed certain. It hadn't prepared him for being shot at by American police officers while handcuffed and defenseless on American soil. "Officer, I'm not moving. I'm not a threat. Please look at my ID. Look at my military credentials. I'm a Navy SEAL. I've served this country for 12 years. His words had the opposite effect intended. Instead of de-escalating the situation, they seemed to intensify it. The second officer's breathing became more labored, his weapon hand more unsteady. Marcus could see it in his eyes. The realization that he'd just shot at someone who was trained to survive exactly this kind of encounter. Someone who knew exactly how close those bullets had come. Someone who understood the difference between a warning shot and an execution. You're lying. You're not military. You're just another thug with a stolen uniform trying to play soldier. Marcus felt something cold settle in his chest. This wasn't about mistaken identity or procedural error anymore. This was personal. This officer needed him to be a criminal because the alternative, that he'd just tried to murder a decorated war veteran for no reason, was unacceptable. In a split second, Marcus understood the pathology at work. Some people would rather kill an innocent man than admit they were wrong about him. Check my wallet. It's all there. My military ID, my VA card, my discharge papers. I'm not your enemy. I'm not anyone's enemy. I'm just trying to get home alive. The first officer radioed for backup, his voice steady but strained. Officer needs assistance. Shots fired. Suspect claims military affiliation. Need supervisor on scene immediately. The next 8 minutes felt like 8 hours. Marcus remained motionless on the ground while more patrol cars arrived, each bringing new officers who processed the scene according to their training, securing the area, photographing evidence, taking statements. But Marcus could see the moment when reality began to penetrate, the way their postures changed when they saw his military ID, the way their voices softened when they recognized the name from local news coverage of his homecoming ceremony, the way their eyes avoided his when they realized what had almost happened. You really a SEAL? One of the newer officers asked quietly, crouching beside him as they prepared to remove the handcuffs. Yes, sir. 12 years. 3 tours. Silver Star, Bronze Star, Purple Heart. I've got the scars to prove it if you need verification. The officer hesitated, then asked the question that revealed everything about how this had gone so wrong. Why didn't you just tell them who you were? Marcus laughed, a bitter sound that had nothing to do with humor. I did. I told them I had a concealed carry permit. I told them I was military. I told them I wasn't a threat. They didn't want to hear it. They wanted me to be something else, something they could justify shooting. The handcuffs came off, but the damage was done. Marcus's wrists were bruised and bloody from struggling against the restraints. His face was scraped from being pressed against asphalt. His shirt was torn, his pride was shattered, and his faith in the country he'd fought for was hanging by a thread thinner than the one that had saved his life when those bullets missed. But as he sat on the curb, waiting for paramedics to check him over, Marcus made a decision that would change everything. He was done being quiet, done being grateful, done accepting that survival meant submission. He'd survived too much, sacrificed too much, to let this be the end of his story. Officer, Marcus said quietly, catching the attention of the supervisor who'd finally arrived, I want to press charges. Attempted murder, assault with a deadly weapon, civil rights violations, official oppression under color of law. Whatever you can make stick, I want it on the record. The supervisor looked uncomfortable. Mr. Steele, I understand you're upset, but these things are complicated. Sometimes situations escalate. Sometimes mistakes get made. Mistakes. Marcus's voice was low but carried the weight of every battlefield he'd survived. He shot at me 4 times while I was handcuffed and lying on the ground. That's not a mistake. That's attempted execution. And if your department doesn't treat it like one, I'm going to make sure everyone knows exactly what happened here tonight. He pulled out his phone, started recording before anyone could object. My name is Marcus Steele. I'm a Navy SEAL, 12 years of service, multiple combat deployments. Tonight I was pulled over for a broken taillight. I complied with every instruction. I identified myself as military. I informed them I was legally carrying a weapon. They handcuffed me, put me on the ground, and shot at me 4 times. I have witnesses. I have video, and I have absolutely nothing left to lose. The video was live-streamed to Facebook before anyone could stop him. Within minutes, it had been shared hundreds of times. Within an hour, thousands. By morning, Marcus Steele would be trending nationwide. His name mentioned alongside other black men who'd survived encounters that should have killed them. his story becoming another data point in America's ongoing racial reckoning. But Marcus wasn't interested in being a data point. He was interested in being a turning point, in making sure that what happened to him didn't happen to anyone else wearing a uniform, military or otherwise. As the paramedics cleaned the blood from his face and checked him for injuries, Marcus stared at the American flag patch on the officer's sleeve and felt something he'd never experienced in combat: the bitter taste of betrayal. He'd fought for that flag, bled for it, watched friends die for it, and now it felt like the country it represented was fighting back, not against enemies, but against him. The press conference was held on the steps of the Virginia Beach Federal Courthouse, exactly 30 days after the shooting. Marcus stood at the podium wearing his dress whites, the same uniform he'd worn to receive his Silver Star, now serving as both armor and statement. Behind him, a phalanx of supporters, veterans from every branch, members of the local NAACP chapter, civil rights attorneys, and family members of other black men who hadn't survived similar encounters. The national media had arrived in force. CNN, MSNBC, Fox News, the major networks. They'd all come expecting a story about police brutality. What they got was something more dangerous. A story about American exceptionalism turned against itself. About the contradiction of asking black men to die for freedoms they couldn't safely exercise at home. "Ladies and gentlemen," Marcus began, his voice carrying the authority of someone who'd commanded men in life-or-death situations. "My name is Marcus Steele. I served 12 years as a Navy SEAL. I've led missions in Afghanistan, Iraq, and Syria. I've been shot 3 times, blown up twice, and decorated for valor under fire. I have survived things that would kill most people. But 30 days ago, I nearly died in a gas station parking lot in my own neighborhood. Not from enemy fire, but from American police officers who saw a black man with military training and decided I was too dangerous to live." The crowd was silent. Cameras rolling, reporters scribbling notes. Marcus could see the officers who'd tried to kill him standing at the back of the crowd, suspended with pay, their lawyers whispering in their ears. He could see his parents in the front row, his mother's face a mask of controlled fury, his father's expression the same one he'd worn when Marcus shipped out for his first deployment: proud, scared, and powerless to protect his son. "I am not here to tell you that I am special," Marcus continued. "I am not here to tell you that I deserve different treatment because I wore a uniform or earned medals. I am here to tell you that I am exactly like every other black man who has been pulled over, harassed, assaulted, or killed by police officers who saw our skin before they saw our humanity." He paused, letting the words sink in. This was the moment he'd rehearsed with his legal team, the pivot from personal story to systemic indictment. The officers who shot at me had no idea I was a Navy SEAL. They had no idea I'd served 12 years. They had no idea I'd earned medals for valor. And here's what you need to understand: none of that should matter. The fact that I'm a decorated war veteran doesn't make what happened to me worse. It makes it more visible. But every single day, black men and women who have never served a day in uniform experience exactly what I experienced. And they don't have press conferences. They don't have high-powered attorneys. They don't have the credibility that comes with military service. They just become statistics. The applause started slowly, building until it became a roar. Marcus waited for it to die down before continuing. 30 days ago, I discovered something that every black person in America already knows. Survival is not guaranteed in this country. It doesn't matter how many medals you've earned, how many degrees you have, how much money you make, or how many times you've risked your life for this nation. When you are black in America, you are always one traffic stop away from becoming a hashtag. He pulled out his phone, held it up for the cameras. "This is the video from that night. You've probably seen parts of it, but you've never seen it like this. With context, with explanation, with the voice of someone who lived to tell the story. Because here's what the news won't show you. I survived because of my training, not despite it. I survived because I knew how to read the situation, how to move, how to communicate, how to de-escalate. But here's the thing. I shouldn't have had to use combat training to survive a traffic stop in my own neighborhood." Marcus played the video, the same footage that had already been viewed millions of times. but now enhanced with his commentary explaining the tactical decisions, the threat assessments, the split-second calculations that separated survival from death. The crowd watched in horror as bullets missed him by inches, as he rolled for cover while handcuffed, as officers panicked and escalated instead of de-escalating. "This is what racism looks like when it meets authority," Marcus said as the video ended. "This is what happens when fear replaces training, when prejudice replaces procedure, when 'I feared for my life' becomes a license to kill instead of a reason to pause. This is what happens when we ask black men to die for their country overseas, but don't protect them from their country at home." Then Marcus delivered his knockout punch, the announcement that would change everything, effective immediately. "I am establishing the Veterans for Justice Initiative. We will provide legal support for veterans who experience racial profiling or police violence. We will conduct research on racial bias in law enforcement encounters with veterans. We will partner with police departments to provide training on de-escalation and implicit bias. And we will file a federal civil rights lawsuit against the officers who attempted to murder me, their supervisors who enabled them, and the department that has refused to hold them accountable." The legal team stepped forward, 3 of the most respected civil rights attorneys in the country, all working pro bono because, as one of them put it, "This case isn't about one man. It's about whether America is willing to confront the contradiction of asking black men to die for freedoms they can't safely exercise. We are seeking damages of $10 million, the lead attorney announced. But more importantly, we are seeking systemic change. Mandatory body cameras for all traffic stops, independent civilian review boards for police misconduct, mandatory training on racial bias and military veteran encounters, and federal legislation requiring reporting of all police shootings involving veterans." Marcus returned to the podium for his closing statement, his voice carrying the weight of every black veteran who'd ever been disrespected, assaulted, or killed after serving their country. "I love this country," he said simply. "I served this country. I bled for this country. I watched friends die for this country. But love without accountability is just enabling. Service without justice is just subservience. And patriotism that doesn't include protecting all Americans isn't patriotism. It's hypocrisy." He paused, looking directly into the cameras, speaking to every black service member watching from bases overseas, from veterans' homes, from neighborhoods where flying the flag sometimes felt like false advertising. "The officers who shot at me thought they were eliminating a threat. Instead, they've created an advocate. They thought they could silence me with bullets. Instead, they've given me a platform. They thought I'd be too scared to fight back. Instead, they've reminded me that I've been trained by the best warriors in the world to never, ever give up." The applause that followed wasn't just celebration. It was declaration. A room full of people who decided that Marcus Steele's story wouldn't end with another black man filing a civil rights lawsuit. It would end with the kind of change that meant no other veteran would have to choose between survival and submission during a routine traffic stop. Marcus stepped back from the podium, but he wasn't done. Not by a long shot, because sometimes the most powerful thing a warrior can do isn't fighting enemies overseas. It's fighting injustice at home, even when that injustice wears a badge and carries a gun. Sometimes the highest form of patriotism is refusing to accept anything less than full citizenship in return for your service. Sometimes coming home means realizing you're not done fighting for your country. You're just fighting a different war. 6 months after the press conference, Marcus Steele sat in a federal courtroom watching the officers who'd tried to kill him plead guilty to civil rights violations. The sentence, 5 years in federal prison, was less than what he'd hoped for but more than most victims of police violence ever received. The monetary settlement, $3.2 million, would fund the Veterans for Justice initiative for years to come. But the real victory was measured in changes that couldn't be quantified in dollars or years. The Virginia Beach Police Department implemented mandatory training on military veteran encounters, developed protocols for de-escalating situations involving armed citizens with military training, and established a Veterans Liaison Program staffed by former military personnel. Other departments across the country began adopting similar measures after the story gained national attention. The Veterans for Justice initiative grew from a one-man operation to a national organization with chapters in 12 states. They'd provided legal representation to over 200 veterans facing racial profiling or police violence, conducted research that influenced policy changes at the federal level, and partnered with law enforcement agencies to provide training that reduced violent encounters between police and black veterans. By nearly 40%, Marcus's living room had become a command center for activism. On any given night, you could find Gold Star families working alongside civil rights attorneys, retired generals strategizing with community organizers, and young veterans learning how to transform their trauma into advocacy. The organization had helped pass legislation in 3 states, requiring special training for police officers interacting with military veterans. And they were working on federal legislation that would create national standards for these encounters. But perhaps the most significant change was the one that happened within Marcus himself. The nightmares still came. Some nights he was back on that asphalt, feeling bullets miss him by fractions of inches, but he'd learned to use those dreams as fuel, as reminders that survival meant nothing if he didn't make it mean something for others. I used to think my hardest battles were behind me, Marcus told a room full of veterans at a community center in Norfolk. I thought surviving combat meant I'd earned the right to live in peace. But I was wrong. My hardest battle was learning that sometimes the enemy wears the same uniform as you. Sometimes the battlefield is your own neighborhood. And sometimes surviving means you have to keep fighting instead of finally getting to rest. The audience, veterans of every race, every war, every branch of service, listened with the kind of attention that came from recognizing their own stories in his. Because every veteran of color in that room had their own version of Marcus's story. The traffic stop that went sideways, the cop who saw threat instead of service, the moment when military training became the only thing standing between them and death at the hands of their own countrymen. Marcus's parents were in the front row, as they were at every major event now. His mother had turned her fear into advocacy, working with other military mothers to support families dealing with racial trauma. His father had finally found the words to describe what he'd experienced in Vietnam, how coming home to racism, after surviving combat, felt like being asked to win the same war twice, on 2 different fronts. The organization had also become a bridge between military and civilian communities. Marcus regularly spoke at police academies, not to shame recruits, but to help them understand that the men and women they were being trained to see as potential threats had often received the same tactical training they had. He'd helped develop scenarios for police training that included encounters with armed veterans, emphasizing de-escalation techniques that respected both public safety and constitutional rights. People ask me if I'm angry, Marcus said during an interview with National Public Radio. Of course I'm angry. I'm angry that I had to use combat training to survive a traffic stop. I'm angry that my military service didn't protect me from the very thing I was fighting against overseas. But anger without action is just noise. I prefer action. The action had taken many forms: testifying before Congress about racial bias in policing, helping launch a national database tracking police violence against veterans, working with the Department of Veterans Affairs to provide mental health support for veterans dealing with racial trauma. Each initiative was a response to needs identified through Marcus's own experience and the stories of veterans who contacted the organization. But the most personal victory came when he was invited to speak at the Naval Special Warfare Center in Coronado, the same facility where he'd trained to become a SEAL. Standing in front of candidates who looked exactly like he had 12 years earlier, Marcus told them something no instructor had told him. You're being trained to survive enemy contact overseas, but I need you to survive something harder, coming home. Coming home to a country that might love your service but still fear your skin. Coming home to neighborhoods where your training makes you a threat instead of an asset. Coming home to police officers who see a black man with combat skills and assume you must be the enemy. The room had been silent. The kind of silence that came from recognizing truth you'd never heard spoken aloud. These candidates were being trained to be the best warriors in the world, but they weren't being trained to be black in America. They weren't being prepared for the possibility that their greatest threat might not be foreign enemies, but domestic fear. Fear of their competence, fear of their training, fear of their existence. "I can't tell you how to win that fight," Marcus continued. "I can only tell you that survival isn't just about tactical awareness and combat skills. Sometimes survival is about knowing when to fight and when to live to fight another day. Sometimes it's about understanding that your greatest service to this country might be refusing to accept anything less than full citizenship in return for your sacrifice." 6 months after the shooting, Marcus returned to the gas station where it had happened. The parking lot looked exactly the same. The same lights, the same pumps, the same asphalt where he'd nearly died. But Marcus was different. He wasn't the man who'd been pulled over that night. Wasn't the veteran who'd believed that military service provided protection. Wasn't the American who'd thought patriotism was enough to overcome racism. He was something harder, something stronger, something more dangerous to injustice than a Navy SEAL with a grudge. He was a survivor with a platform, a warrior with a cause, a citizen with nothing left to prove and everything left to fight for. As he stood in that parking lot, Marcus thought about the men who'd tried to kill him. Not with hatred. He'd learned to let that go, but with determination. They'd wanted to write his story, to define him as a threat that needed eliminating, to add him to the long list of black men who died for the crime of existing while exceptional. Instead, they'd given him a new mission. Not one assigned by military command, but one chosen by survival. Not one that ended with deployment orders, but one that began with a simple promise. Never again. Not to him, not to anyone else. Not while he had breath to fight and a platform to speak. The Veterans for Justice initiative had grown beyond his wildest dreams, but Marcus knew the real work was just beginning. Every day brought new stories, new victims, new battles to fight. But he'd been trained for this, trained to lead, trained to survive, trained to fight for something bigger than himself. He'd spent 12 years fighting America's enemies overseas. He planned to spend the rest of his life fighting America's enemies at home, whether they wore badges or business suits, whether they hid behind flags or false patriotism, whether they understood they were the enemy or still believed they were the good guys. Because sometimes the highest form of service isn't dying for your country, it's living to make your country better, even when your country tried to kill you for it. Marcus Steele's story doesn't end with courtrooms or settlements, with viral videos or speaking engagements. It continues every time a black veteran drives through their neighborhood without fear. Every time a police department implements training on military veteran encounters. Every time someone chooses solidarity over silence when witnessing racial profiling.